February 15, 1988 Wrestling Observer Newsletter, A Tale of Two HEBNERS. By Observer Staff. February 15, 1988. There's two Dave Hebners in that ring. All I can say is that I hope whoever came up with that finish got a nice bonus in this week's paycheck. It's been 33 years since pro wrestling had been on a TV network during prime time. Well, wrestling still hasn't been there, but once again Titan Sports appears to have come out smelling like a rose. They accomplished what they set out to accomplish, and presenting pro wrestling was obviously not in their plans. They got the title from Hulk Hogan without having him do a job. Andre wasn't hurt. Wrestlemania was set up. And most of all, they ended the show with an angle so bizarre that it diverted everyone's attention from the few weaknesses in the show. Most of all, the sleight of hand finish distracted everyone and stunned them long enough so there was no threat of a riot. And that was a stroke of genius, because doing a screw job title stealing from a babyface as over as Hulk Hogan could easily escalate into an out-of-control situation. For those of you overseas, the blow-by-blow detail here is devoted to you. Only 2 matches aired from the February 5th card in Indianapolis Market Square Arena. The show aired live on NBC TV in the Eastern and Central time zones and was shown on a tape delay in the western half of the country. The result of the main event, with Hulk Hogan losing to Andre the Giant, was pretty well known within wrestling circles, to the point where it was so well known I figured it was a false plant. Actually, here in the Bay Area it was hard not to know the result ahead of time, being that several radio stations has already reported the title change starting as early as Monday, and then the San Jose Mercury ran a story on Friday morning in the front page of the sports section detailing that Andre was going to beat Hogan to set up WrestleMania. The reason all this became public knowledge was Titan had already sent advertising agencies info on WrestleMania 4 with the slogan, "Hogan tries to regain his title." The funny thing is that the folks at Titan weren't concerned at all about this, and I guess in reality they shouldn't have been, because all the publicity in giving away the finish had to help the ratings. I know Dusty would turn over in his grave over something like this. For those of you in the Bay Area, here's a trivia note. San Francisco's most famous jobber, Jerry Monty, made the opening credits. He was the victim of Honky Tonk's neckbreaker. Now I've talked with a few TV people over this weekend and all pretty well agreed it wasn't the usual slick production Titan is famous for. Blame that on the fact they were doing it live, and there were noticeable problems. Randy Savage's pre-match interview was partially illegible, first because the interview mic wasn't turned on, and second because the background Honky Tonk Man music was being played too loud. The interview was just a waste of time. Although they were far better than Crockett, we could see problems where the cameramen were missing key shots, although this was only a minor problem. They opened with the Honky Tonk Man vs. Randy Savage Intercontinental title match. As usual, Honky Tonk and Peggy Sue, Sherry Martel put on a great show before the match. Once the bell rang, Honky was his usual dud self. Savage worked hard to carry him and succeeded in making it only a bad, but watchable match. The script called for several instances where Randy had to lay on his back so Honky could serenade Elizabeth, so you can't fault Randy for the bad match since he was limited by the framework of it. They only went 80-20, more than half of which was serenading and stalling. The cameras missed key interference by Jimmy Hart. The finish saw Savage run Honky's shoulder into the ring post and get back into the ring for the countout victory. At one point the camera also missed Hart using the megaphone. At that point we were wondering if not only had Vince hired Earl Hebner, but also Jackie Crockett. Savage got hit with the megaphone again after the match. Honky got his guitar and was about to hit Randy, but Liz jumped in the way to save the day. Honky stalled some more, went to hit Liz, then Randy saved the day, and we ended the show with Randy opening up the ropes for Liz and carrying her high above his head. A bunch of symbolic BS. I'll give the whole thing 2 stars, only because of the post-match stuff. Match was no better than 1 1/4 stars. Nobody expected Andre and Hogan to have a good match. In all honesty, Andre couldn't give a good match with anyone in this business. He appears to have lost a good deal of weight since his last appearance on Thanksgiving. He plays the heel role great with his facial expressions. But he has no business wrestling with his current physical condition. The first 90 seconds saw nothing happen. Then Hogan started beating on Ted DiBiase and Virgil, which killed the first 2 minutes with Andre standing in a stationary position. Hogan then started punching and eye-raking Andre. Andre never went down, probably because he had so much trouble trying to get back up. At the 4-minute mark, Hogan climbed to the top rope and Andre tossed him off the ropes onto the mat. I've never seen Hogan take that Ric Flair bump. Andre choked Hogan for a few minutes. Even in the position with no movement, Andre was starting to look decidedly pale. Andre tried a kick to the face, his other foot couldn't support him, and down he went. As Andre fell, I'm sure Vince probably saw $25 million flying out the window. But Andre went back to choking. One thing which shocked me was the crowd was more concerned with mugging and waving, and it appeared a good percentage weren't even paying attention to the match. Hulk made a comeback and did the leg drop, but Virgil distracted the referee so there was no count. Andre then got up and did what was supposed to be a vertical suplex but in reality was a poor hip lock and covered Hogan. Hogan got his shoulder up at the count of 1, but the ref counted to 3 anyway, and at 9:05 Hogan dropped the title after a 4-year reign. Before the December 27 Sumo Hall imitation could begin, and just after Andre gives Ted the belt and twice refers to it as the World Tag Team Championship, the fun of live television, who shows up but referee Dave Hebner. Of course the referee in the match was supposed to be Dave Hebner. In reality the ref who played heel for the night was Earl Hebner, Dave's brother, who up until a few days earlier had worked for the Crockett's as a referee. So as Vince and Jesse exclaimed about there being 2 Dave Hebners, the nation stood in stunned silence. The heel Dave Hebner Earl then tossed Dave out of the ring. Hogan then picked up Earl the Pearl over his head and tossed him over the top ropes way out of the ring. DiBiase and Virgil were supposed to catch Earl, but Hogan threw him too far, way over their head, and Earl took a nasty fall outside the ring. From the post-match interview with Hogan, it appears that the story will be that DiBiase paid somebody to have plastic surgery to look like Dave Hebner and play heel ref and steal the title belt away. The syndicated TV shows which aired the next day has an early mention that WWF President Jack Tunney had banned the commentators from talking about the previous night's occurrences. After all, the Cindies were taped before the Friday anyway, although the heel commentators tried to talk and were bleeped out. Jesse even did a Dan Rather, storming off the set and crying about censorship. Don't get me wrong. Everything worked so well it was scary. I'm figuring that $25 million gross for WrestleMania 4 may now even be a conservative estimate. The next day, on Titan cards in Boston and Philadelphia, DiBiase appeared billed as WWF champion. On this weekend's syndicated shows, an announcement will be made, apparently that the title will be held up. I'm not sure of this, it just seems to be working in that direction. Actually, they've got several ways they could go, bearing in mind they have to come up with hot main events not only for WrestleMania 4, but also to leave something for August 29th, another pay-per-view event. They could hold the title up, put DiBiase vs. Hogan and then still have an Andre vs. Hogan match for August. They could make DiBiase the champ, have Hogan win it at WM and defend against Andre, or have Hogan fail to win it and have to have another rematch in August at which time he regains it. They could make DiBiase champ and have him decree that Hogan must first beat Andre at WM before he gets a shot at him in August. Most likely it won't be that complicated. My guess is a title held up, Hogan vs. Andre in a cage at WrestleMania 4 with Hogan walking out the door to win. Wrestler Jeff Ports Jr., who wrestled in Stampede Wrestling as Garfield Ports and is best known in the United States under the ring name Scott McGee, suffered a stroke late last week. Apparently Ports, a 30-year-old native of England whose father Jeff Sr. was a big name on the British mat scene in the 1960s and worked in North America in the early 1970s, collapsed while pumping gasoline. The original prognosis for Ports wasn't good, but he's taken a turn for the better in the last week. For the first 2 days it was touch and go whether or not he would make it, and it was thought he would be paralyzed for life. It turns out he's already able to speak, albeit with impairment, and he's already showing some movement. It's too early to tell if there's any kind of chance for him to return to the ring. The Dynamite Kid also collapsed this past week in the San Francisco airport prior to last Saturday's card. Apparently at least one radio station reported that the kid had a heart attack, and in fact that was the first word we'd received as well. In reality he had some sort of a seizure caused by stress and overactivity and was hospitalized, but in fact has already returned to the ring. Bam Bam Bigelow, who had arthroscopic knee surgery, has also already returned to the ring. American Wrestling Alliance. The final card at the Minneapolis Auditorium took place on February 4th before a disappointing crowd of 1,700 fans for the Nostalgia Night. Well, part of the problem was that Titan decided to one-up the American Wrestling Alliance once again with a similar gimmick in the Twin Cities for next week, a Mad Dog Vachon night, as they are doing around the Midwest, and bringing in their own version of old-timers, like the Crusher, Nick Bockwinkel and Blackjack Lanza, which had slightly more name value among those fans who can't remember football with no face masks and leather helmets. Anyway, Vern trotted out Red Bastien, Burt Smith, better known as Stan Big K Kowalski, Carl Eller, who never wrestled but was a member of the famous Minnesota Vikings Purple People Eaters front four in the early 1970s, Butch Levy, Leo Nomalini, Hard-Boiled Haggerty, Dick the Bruiser, who they actually put into the ring against Sheik Adnan El-Kassi, Billy Robinson, and the biggest cheer for anyone probably was for perennial jobber Kenny Sodbuster J. Oh yes, Vern Gagne and Stanley Blackburn were there as well. Results from the show saw Ricky Rice, an Eddie Sharkey student who worked as a member of the Top Guns tag team for Pro Wrestling America, gain a pin over JT Thomas, then Ray Stevens, subbing for Billy Jack Strong, let Soldat Ustinov beat on him for the entire match before Ray pinned him using the ropes. Billy Robinson went to a 20-minute draw with Tom Zank. Wahoo McDaniel and Baron Von Rasch down the Nasty Boys, while Hard-Boiled Haggerty, who appeared a lot more lively as referee in comparison to his two stationary wrestlers, Bruiser and Sheik Cassie, wound up King Sheik in 3 minutes when Ustinov did a run-in. All these matches were varying degrees of terrible. The Robinson-Zank match had some interesting overtones, being that it makes little promotional sense since Zank is the only viable contender they've got for Curt Hennig, and he was held to a draw by a 50-year-old retired wrestler. I know, Billy was a legend in his day. Actually, Robinson controlled the entire match, which was in ultra-slow motion, and Zank had no opportunity to do anything to get himself over. The last two matches were better, with the Midnight Rockers retaining their tag belts, beating Kevin Kelly and Mr. Go, Steve Olszanowski in a ninja get-up, subbing for the departed Nick Kinniski, in a 20-minute match which was decent, and the finale saw Greg Gagne pin Curt Hennig in a cage match which was never really advertised as being either a title match or a non-title match. Both guys juiced. The thing went 14 minutes with Leo Nomalini refereeing. The finish saw Curt shove Leo, then old Leo 60 years old, which actually is just a few years older than Bruiser, Cassie and Stevens, got down in the three-point stance and gave Curt a football tackle. At least Leo looked better than Andre, and Greg got the pin. So now we've got our world champion doing a job for a 60-year-old man. Since I'll bet the majority of readers don't even know who Leo is, he was an All-American football player at the University of Minnesota in the late 1940s who played alongside Vern, and he later wrestled pro during the pro football offseason. He is in the NFL Hall of Fame in the 1950s before retiring around 1962 or so. No return date was announced, nor is a new venue for Twin Cities live matches ironed out. Blackburn was on TV explaining that a cage match can't be a title match, so Curt is still the champ. I guess in reality, Kinniski may have quit rather than been fired, although as in most of these cases, usually it's a combination of both. Kinniski was unhappy at his last weekly check, $170, and went back home to Canada. Nor the Barbarian is no longer working here as well. Even though he's over in a big way in the Twin Cities due to his car commercials, Vern never wanted to push him because he knew the relations would never last. Adrian Adonis won't be back until March at the earliest. The bout where he broke his ankle was at a TV taping against Ricky Rice, in case you are looking for it. No word one way or the other on Paul E. Dangerously, other than he hasn't been around of late, but last word I had is that negotiations between himself and the Gagnes hadn't been broken off, either, although the Midnight Express won't be coming back. Stampede, the January 29th show in Calgary, drew 1,300 as Kerry Brown opened, going to a 15-minute draw with Johnny Smith, then Makan Singh squashed Biff Wellington in 9:40. Jason the Terrible pinned Hashif Khan in 6:56 after a pile driver. Leo Burke returned to the area and put Goldie Rogers to sleep in 10:10 of a good match. A very good match saw Rip Rogers, who has been a surprise here since he's turned into a good worker, which was unexpected by the promotion, put Chris Benoit in the Boston Crab in 15 minutes after Brown sprayed something in Benoit's eyes, and the ref immediately called for the bell instead of waiting for the submission, declaring Benoit was unable to continue in a controversial heel ref finish. Steve DiSalvo went to a double disqualification with Bad News Allen in 7 minutes in a pretty good brutal match. Both Singh and Jason did run-ins to cause the double DQ, to set up the main event on the February 5th card in a tag match. The main event saw Bruce Hart and Brian Pillman retain the tag belts, beating Great Gama and Jerry Morrow when Gama went to throw powder at Hart, who ducked. It went into Morrow's face and he was pinned after a flying clothesline. Morrow subbed for Garfield Ports, who had the stroke earlier in the week. Gary Albright, the 330-pound former All-American wrestler from Nebraska, was introduced at the card as being Makan Singh's half-brother. He is currently being trained by the Harts and should make his pro debut in around a month, but is said to have legitimate potential. Brown and Rip Rogers are forming a tag team called the Midnight Cowboys. The February 5th show drew another near sellout, although it was a late-arriving crowd, since many stayed home to watch Vince's show, but by the main event the place was just about full. All I know about the main event is that it was Bad News and Singh versus Jason and DiSalvo, and ended up with DiSalvo turning heel on Jason to set up their feud. Singh will feud with Owen Hart when he returns, probably on the February 19th card. The February 5th show was also the last night for Bad News, who didn't do any jobs on the way out because McMahon didn't want him doing anything to bolster Stampede. They are still hoping for a Ric Flair versus Owen Hart match for the spring, although the folks at JCP seem pretty inaccessible to such a proposal. New Japan, the TV tapings on February 1st in Saitama drew 3,150 as Tatsumi Fujinami and Kengo Kimura downed Buzz Sawyer and Owen Hart in the main event when Fujinami pinned Hart in a good match. The other TV matches saw Antonio Inoki and Seiji Sakaguchi go to a double disqualification against Big Van Vader, Leon White, and Masa Saito, while Ricky Choshu downed Bob Orton via DQ and Orton hit the referee, although Choshu gave him the lariat after the match. Orton is doing very well on this tour and his bout with Choshu was a hot match. Just to show how much the riot at Sumo Hall hurt, the Antonio Inoki vs. Ricky Choshu rematch on 275 in Tokyo had to be held at Korakuen Hall, which drew an easy sellout in the 2,000 or so range with Inoki winning via countout. Also on the card, Hiroshi Hashi went to a double countout with Nobuhiko Takada while Shiro Koshinaka pinned Kunyaki Kobayashi in the junior heavyweight tournament. The series ended on February 7 in Sapporo with the finals of the junior tournament sending Hashi vs. Koshinaka, while Fujinami and Kimura defended the IWGP tag belts against Riki Choshu and Super Strong Machine, and Inoki defends the IWGP World title against Vader. Hart returns here in May, which should put to rest any rumors of him being WWF bound at least for a few months. Even though Hashi is getting the big push, I'm told that Takada and Kazuo Yamazaki are still the most over of the junior heavyweights. New Japan wrestler Naoki Sano, a prelim guy who is working in Mexico under the name Masked Bushido, which in Spanish means Samurai Spirit, won the UWA International Lightweight title from Astro de Oro while at the same time, without his mask, Sano, Hirokazu Hata, and Asai hold the Mexican six-man tag title. Inoki's victories over Bad News Allen on Dom DiNucci's promotional tour on January 23 in Milan and January 24 in Rome drew crowds of 12,125 and 13,854 respectively, which shows just how over Inoki is in Italy. It appears Samba Wrestling champ Chris Dolman will have a match against Inoki this summer, possibly in the big Tokyo Dome card in July. All Japan, not much in the way of news since there is no wrestling here until late February. However, I made a mistake in that Toshiaki Kawada and Samson Fuyuki captured the Asian tag belts on January 24 from Takashi Ishikawa and Akio Sato. I'm not sure of this, but I'll get it cleared up next time, but I believe Kawada and Fuyuki, who are a hard-working prelim team called the Footloose, dropped the belts on January 29 in Tokyo to Ishikawa and Mighty Inoue. Other notes: Weekly Pro Wrestling came out with its 1987 awards as voted by its readers. I can't give too many details since it's in Japanese, but I'll have top placings hopefully in a future issue. Genichiro Tenryu continued to show he's the hottest wrestler in Japan as he was voted both Best Native Wrestler and also Most Popular Wrestler. The May 25 match between Akira Maeda and Nobuhiko Takada vs. Kazuo Yamazaki and Yoshiaki Fujiwara was voted Best Tag Team Match of the Year. The Antonio Inoki vs. Masa Saito Jungle match was voted Match of the Year in singles, with the Inoki vs. Saito April 27 match finishing second, and Takada vs. Shiro Koshinaka on February 5 placing third. The October 20 match where Chigusa Nagio won the women's world title from Yukari Amori was voted Women's Singles Match of the Year, beating out the Nagio vs. Lioness Asuka match which did so well in our yearbook poll. Women's Tag Match of the Year was on January 5 with the Crush Girls beating Yumi Ogura and Kazue Nagaori, while Bam Bam Bigelow was named Best Foreign Wrestler. Miscellaneous notes: the WWC in San Juan had a big show last weekend at a baseball stadium headlined by Carlos Colon vs. Iron Sheik, which drew something like 25,000 fans. An indie build as Georgia Championship Wrestling has a February 11 show booked in Albany, Georgia featuring the Hunter Dale Veazey vs. Scott Armstrong for the North American title, the Mod Squad vs. the Children of Doom for the Georgia Tag Team titles, Jerry Oates vs. Ken Timms for the United States title, Brickhouse Brown vs. Lazartron, no word on if it's Hector Guerrero or not, although since Hector's name isn't anywhere else, it might as well be, and Ken Dillinger vs. Tom Pritchard for the Alabama Junior Heavyweight title. They are using WWF graphics in their TV ad, which is airing on several local stations. Crockett has a show in the same city 2 days earlier. A group called Atlantic Wrestling Federation drew 450 to Hanover, Pennsylvania last week with the best wrestler on the show, a guy called the Bounty Hunter. The most recognizable name on the card was Larry Winters. Chavo Guerrero is now working in the catering business in Southern California, so is apparently retired from wrestling. A quick correction. In last week's issue I said the NWA show on January 24 at the Nassau Coliseum drew a $60,000 gate. Actually it was an $80,000 gate, and a paid attendance of around 6,200. World Organization Wrestling ran a show on January 22 in Philadelphia, Mississippi. Drawing 150 as Bob Sweeten pinned Paul Diamond, Davey Haskins pinned Pat Tanaka in 15 minutes of a real good match. Tanaka came down from a backdrop with such force that he broke the ring. Tug Taylor and a midget wrestler beat Samoan Kokina, son of Sika, and another midget. The Batten twins won a tag match from a team called the Fargo Brothers, who are actually Pat Rose and Marcel Pringle, managed by veteran Donnie Fargo. Match was better than average, although Rose looks terrible with blonde hair and Pringle can't work. Main event was a non-title match as Jerry Stubbs won a strap match from their US champion Bob Holly in 5:30. Alexis Smirnoff is looking at running more independents in Northern California in the upcoming months and talking with Abdullah the Butcher about coming in. His first show is February 13th in Modesto and he's got a few hundred tickets sold already. Virginia Wrestling Association has a show in Richmond this week with biggest names Mark Steamboat and Johnny Ringo. Former pro wrestler Robert Michael Doggendorf, wrestled as Mike Doggendorf for Angelo Paffo's old ICW, was arrested for wife beating, although the charges were lowered from a felony to a misdemeanor. He works as a director of custody at the Fayette County Jail in Lexington, Kentucky. Pat Tanaka, Ron Starr and Mr. Ito Umanosuke Ueda of WOW appeared on the January 15th World Class card in Dallas, which was a taping, which is why you saw them even though they aren't working the territory. Tanaka and Starr beat Steve Casey and Jason Sterling in a pretty good match. Ito also was put over in a prelim. They apparently worked some sort of a deal with Ken Mantell to get them on the tube and put over, I suppose, for credibility if it ever appears on ESPN. Tanaka looked really good. Ito is actually the money behind the WOW promotion. CWA, Gary Young and Max Payne won the tournament on February 1st to capture the Southern Tag Team titles, although I'm not sure who they beat in the finals. That means they would have wrestled the Midnight Rockers in a rare heel versus heel main event later on the show. Scott Hall and Tio Khan have left the area. No word on their whereabouts. Newcomers this week are the Choir Boys with manager Ernest Angel, the babyface tag team of Pat Tanaka and Paul Diamond, who are just in for a few weeks before returning to the WOW promotion, and a rookie tag team called the Zebra Warriors. Skip Young, Sweet Brown Sugar, is also gone, having lasted less than 1 week. The big news here is that they wound up turning Bill Dundee heel after all. They had a battle royal with the winner getting a shot at the CWA title on the February 6th TV show. It came down to Jeff Jarrett and Dundee. Dundee tossed Jarrett over the top ropes, but Jarrett held on and flipped himself back in the ring. As Dundee was strutting, Jarrett hit him from behind with 2 drop kicks and Dundee went over the top rope. Later in the show, Jerry Lawler defended the CWA title against Jarrett. After a referee bump, Dundee comes back and hit Jarrett with a chair and then hit Lawler with a chair and pretty well thrashed both of them. The promotion has already had some negative response to the Choir Boys and manager Angel, who is doing a preacher gimmick. They are getting nasty phone calls from religious groups already. Angel says he's on a mission to create Wrestling Village USA as a Jim and Tammy takeoff. I'm told his tag team has no physical credibility, which hurts the gimmick. Angel has already saved the soul of Payne, Daryl Peterson, and Young on TV. The Zebra Warriors pre 2 very small guys, even smaller than Kenny Wayne, who are completely green but bump okay. The February 8th card in Memphis has Lawler vs. Payne, Dundee vs. Jarrett, Zebras vs. Billy Travis, who is working with 2 broken ribs, and Manny Fernandez, Young vs. Tanaka, Choir Boys vs. Bruise Brothers, Wayne vs. Diamond, and Ricky Nelson vs. Jimmy Jack Funk. February 5th in Blytheville, Alaska before 200 saw Jarrett pin Don Base 1 star, Payne pinned Nelson 1 1/2 star, Dundee pinned Young 2 stars, Dundee and Nelson beat Payne and Young via DQ 2.5 stars, and Fernandez and Jarrett beat Base and Funk 1 1/2 star. February 6th in Jonesboro drew 250 as Travis pinned Base 1 star, Wayne pinned Zebra number 1 1.5 star, Tim Hall, a protege of Jerry Bryant, making his pro debut, and Jerry Bryant beat rookie Pat Patera and Don Base. Wayne and Travis beat Zebra Warriors, and main event was a barbed wire match with Lawler over Payne via do 3 stars. Ratings by Brian Trammell. Mexico, a brief rundown on the scene here. There are literally dozens of promotions in the country and wrestling draws huge crowds, although the gates aren't high by US standards because of the weak peso, so there are very few Americans working here, and I don't believe there are any working here on a regular basis. Tickets generally range from $1.50 to $3 in US money, and even the main eventers earn something like $25 to $30 on cards, which draw several thousand fans. MS1 and Masakari were recently named Mexico's Tag Team of the Year. Top drawing cards in Mexico City include Pero Aguayo, Super Halcon, Super Muñeco, the Japanese trio, and of course veterans like Mil Mascaras, Dos Caras, and El Canek. One of the top heels in Mexico City is a honky-tonk man ripoff billed as Beautiful Elvis. Negro Casas, who some think is the best worker in the world, has resurfaced working out of Tijuana. In the Mexico City metro area alone, there are 5 cards every Wednesday, 7 cards every Friday, and 10 shows every Sunday, and even so, big cards in Mexico City often draw in excess of 15,000 fans. Tijuana has 2 shows per week, generally drawing 5,000 to 6,000 per show. January 10th in Tijuana before 5,000 saw Super Muñeco and Kiss and Kerry Sampson beat Mike Starr, former Wrestling Bulletin publisher Mark Velios, and Great Goliath, of Black Gordman and Goliath fame, and Toro Asesino, while January 24th drew 6,000 as Goliath beat Kiss in a chain match. Starr won a 12-man battle royal and Bobby El Magnifico and Sampson beat Starr and Asesino. Southern Championship Wrestling. This is turning into a pretty hot promotion in the Atlanta area as they had a turnaway crowd of 620 in Marietta on February 6th, many of them coming to see Ricky Morton. The first hour of the TV taping saw Sugar Ray Lloyd, a white guy, Fairly Green beat Sandy Beach, Randy Rose managed by Paul E. dangerously beat Dino Manelli, Joel and David Deaton beat John Michaels, who turned babyface at the last taping, which explains why Steve Lawler and the Nightmare are together as a heel team, and Sheik Donovan in a bout where Joel looked really good carrying things. Mr. Wrestling 2 beat the Hitman, a fat masked man. Nick Bizich pinned Steve Pritchard, who was half of Deep South's tag team champions the Rock and Roll Rebels, and Tommy and Johnny Rich and Ricky Morton beat Steve Lawler and the Nightmare, Ted Allen, and Jimmy Bryant in the finale. Bruiser Brody also had a match with a mannequin that he referred to as Dick Slater, and he tore the mannequin literally limb from limb. The second hour saw Lloyd and Pritchard beat Easy Rider, the Hitman in the first hour without his mask, and Bryant, Mr. Atlanta pinned Chuck McCall. Bizich beat Eeyore via DQ with Jerry Blackwell doing a run-in. Actually, that isn't an appropriate term, maybe a roll-in would be a better description. Wrestling 2 and Ranger Ross beat R.D. Swain and Lawler. Brody destroyed Steve Bennett, with the highlight being when Brody shoved Bennett's face into a plate of chicken. The shows are held at a country bar/restaurant, and then Dick Slater showed up and they brawled for a while to set up their upcoming feud. When Grizzly Boone beat Beach, and the final match saw Tommy and Johnny Rich go to a time limit draw against the Diadons. They announced that Abdullah the Butcher, Robert Gibson, to team with Ricky Morton of course, will be on the February 21st taping along with a probable Brody vs. Slater main event. Atlanta will be hosting a World of Wheels auto convention this coming weekend with guest appearances by some of the POW girls on February 12th, Paul E. Dangerously, Brody and Paula Orndorff on February 13th, and Kerry Von Erich and the Fantastics on February 14th. The Fantastics will work at least 1 or 2 shows here next weekend, although they won't be on the taping. I saw the first 4 shows, January airings, and it's a pretty lively independent which is fun to watch and has a better caliber of wrestling than most indies. There is talk of Dennis Condrey coming in to team with Randy Rose once again and feud with Morton and Gibson. Michael Hayes may work a few dates here as well. This group and the other independent in Georgia, Deep South, are involved in a pretty major war of the words of late. On a recent Deep South show they made tons of fun of Joe Pedicino, TV announcer for this promotion and also of Pro Wrestling This Week fame, and PWTW co-host Bonnie Blackstone. They began a segment saying they had 2 of the most important wrestling personalities on their show, then had one enormous guy in an easy chair pretend to be Pedicino and get stuck and need 3 people to get him out of his chair, and had a would-be Blackstone play a bimbo type. This group has been basically quiet about the whole thing, although they recently showed a tape of a Puerto Rico match with the Invader against the Assassin, and Pedicino countered with "This is the Puerto Rican Assassin because there is nobody named the Assassin in the United States that can wrestle." Of course, the head of Deep South is Jody Hamilton, who happens to wrestle as the Assassin and is the group's headliner. Those inside quotes are fun at times. Also on an Atlanta show this weekend, Michael Hayes was on talking about the NWA, saying it may be the major league, but their checks are minor league. It can be safely assumed Hayes won't be back with JCP anytime in the near future. NWA, pretty much a slow week from here. The biggest story is that Ted Turner is now in bed with these guys and trying to help them get back on the pay-per-view track. As we've mentioned before, JCP announced 4 pay-per-view events originally for this year: Bunkhouse Final, Crockett Cup, American Bash and Starrcade. McMahon, now the undisputed king of wrestling and especially wrestling on pay-per-view, then countered announcing his own show for Thanksgiving, plus a summer show and Wrestlemania 4 on pay-per-view, and with a 60 before and 21 day after exclusivity clause, basically cancelled out any hope JCP had of getting on with the majority of systems in order to make the potential big pay-per-view bucks. As we've noted, the future of this business on a major league level is definitely not in house shows, but in pay-per-view and outside merchandising, and with McMahon blocking Crockett from pay-per-view, then no matter what else may happen or how much Crockett can turn things around, he won't be able to compete on a major league basis. Anyway, Turner is trying to put his muscle in and help Crockett get an early July Bash, probably a War Games, on pay-per-view, although at this point plans for the Crockett Cup and Starrcade on pay-per-view have already been canned. After the Bash, they don't plan for another pay-per-view until January of '89 with the Bunkhouse Final. I guess the big difference between these guys and McMahon is that at least McMahon learns from his mistakes. As of the week of January 17th, the JCP syndicated network remained with a 6.5 national rating, in the number 12 spot, while Titan is at number 3, with a 10.6 rating. Brad Armstrong and Tim Horner appear ripe for a push with a feud with the Sheepherders taking the place of the Rock and Roll Express. I think one of them is also going to have to take Ricky's place and get a haircut courtesy of the Sheeps. Am I imagining this, or has Sting totally surpassed Lex Luger and Barry Windham as the top young babyface? I was afraid Luger would lose his steam like Nikita Koloff did, but believe me, in my wildest dreams I didn't think he'd lose it by early February. I figured at worst he'd be a hot headliner at least through the early summer before slipping into Nikita-level nothing stratosphere. Luger is already one of the boys and stuck in a tag team feud with Windham against Tully Blanchard and Arnold Anderson. Ole Anderson has several dates booked in the Carolinas besides this weekend at the Omni, so he's back at least on a semi-regular basis, probably to fill the slot left vacant by Nikita Koloff, who will be gone after the end of this coming weekend. Koloff will be on a 6-week to 2-month sabbatical. Buddy Landel tried to call in for work, but they wouldn't give him the time of day. Landel didn't even last for his entire Japan tour, pulling the disappearing act after just 2 weeks. Last word I have on him is that he's starting back with Continental in early March. The divorce decrees for Hayes, Rock and Roll and Steve Williams are finals with apparently no chance for reconciliation. Rock and Roll is claiming they've got a June starting date with Titan. We'll have to wait and see, and we'll be trying to find any independent work they can until that time. Lots of people are calling the JCP offices about the Rand are in the company line for now, as they aren't gone, they're just renegotiating. Hayes appears headed to world class, although he's made contact with Titan, as have 2 or 3 other key personnel still with JCP, at least 2 of which are talking like they won't be here much longer. Williams is simply going to work Japan, although he should try and hook on with world class for spot duty just to stay in shape, because even though Williams is a stud athlete, laying off for 3 months and going to Japan doesn't seem wise because of the conditioning needed to make it big in Japan. Actually, with all the bad news, I've got to mention that I think the booking is getting on the right track. The Road Warrior angle was great, and I truly believe it will get over in a good way at the box office. I'm not talking sellouts everywhere, but should help deliver good houses. I could be wrong about this, and if I am, I'll be told it, but to me, as someone who has a best friend who is a 500-pound bench presser, that the Greensboro weights were bogus as well. It appeared to me that they were doing 472 easily, even for guys who can legitimately bench press in the 550 range. From the number of plates it appeared to be 365 and the 600 looked like 505. Road Warriors will be working with Warlord and Barbarian in ladder matches, a wooden ladder with $50,000 on top of the ladder. Whoever came up with the idea of saying animal broke the orbital bone in his I came up with a good one. A technical term makes it sound so much more legit. Even though Sting certainly needs work on interviews, he's got an amazing rapport with the audience and can do some amazing things in the ring, and I truly believe he's the kind of a guy who in about a year someone could actually build a promotion around. His work is good already and great in spots, and his charisma beats both Luger and Barry Windham by a substantial margin. Eddie Gilbert was offered a spot in the Varsity Club but apparently didn't want it. There will be no more mention of the WWF, and whatever unification matches were once in the cards won't be taking place. Since I've got the space this week, I want to comment on the Windham vs. Blanchard bout on WTBS, which went 27 minutes a few weeks back. Now, I liked the match. I can get into the concept of working on a body part with the guy selling the injury, etc. Both guys know how to work that style. The smashing of the chair on Windham's knee looked legit, and Windham did his usual great job of selling the wounded limb. Lots of readers enjoyed the match as well. Now, I'm not going to comment on the ending because that's not the issue here. The issue is, Tully had Barry in the figure 4 at the 22-minute mark, after working on the leg for 12 minutes, and the crowd was chanting boring and there was no heat. Technically, from the wrestling I grew up with, it was a good match, but the fans weren't buying it. I hope everyone takes notice of this, because if it continues to happen, long matches may become as prevalent as Dusty's muscular definition. I can recall in Houston this past year I saw a Flair vs. Windham match, which wound up going about 30 minutes and was every bit of a 4-star match. They did their usual slow start for 7 minutes before turning up the heat, but in those 7 minutes, several hundred fans went home. So what in my eyes, and in the eyes of the ringsiders who were into the match totally, was a great match obviously was not a great match in the eyes of the bleacher folks who were leaving during the main event. The idea that these slow builders may not appeal to today's fans is a concept I'd rather not address, but I've seen too many examples of fans being unable to retain interest in long matches. The point being, the idea of slow building and telling a story with the matches may not be viable concepts to today's fans. I'd like to hear others' opinions on this. January 24th in Orlando, Florida saw Ron Garvin beat Dick Murdoch in a cage match, Brad Armstrong and Ricky Santana beat Eddie Gilbert and the Terminator, Mark Laurinaitis, Bugsy McGraw beat Mighty Yankee No. 1 Jerry Gray, Ron Simmons beat Yankee No. 2 Bob Cook, Santana beat Black Bart, Shaska Whatley beat Robbie Idle and Tiger Conway beat Rex King. The Sporting News a few weeks back ran a clip about Lyle Alzato's sitcom Learning the Ropes, where Alzato plays a single parent who supplements his job as a school teacher by being a masked wrestler called the Maniac. Steve Williams originally doubled for Alzato in the early pilots, which were filmed just before Christmas. When Williams was wrestling Ric Flair, he injured his knee landing wrong on a leap from the top ropes. He came back, heavily bandaged and limping, for a match with Tully Blanchard. In that one, Tully was supposed to crack him hard over the back with a chair, but instead hit him in the head and busted him open. Doc then had his head patched up for a match with Arnold Anderson, but finally his knee blew out. Anderson then doubled for Alzato and teamed with Lex Luger against the Road Warriors. Anderson fell from the ring and jammed his shoulder on a TV camera. WWF, just a trivia note. About 14 months ago in Denver, rookie Owen James teamed with SD Jones to lose to the Hart Foundation. Owen James is of course Owen Hart, who wrestled against his brother that night. Even then he outshined everyone with Titan, which is probably why he hasn't been back. Saw the January 25th MSG main event with Hogan and Bigelow vs DiBiase and Virgil, and it was a very good match. Without question, DiBiase is the single most perfect opponent for Hogan in this country as far as working. He has this knack for getting the most out of Hogan. Actually, the bout was 9 minutes, mostly Ted versus Hogan, since Bigelow's knee was giving him lots of trouble already and Virgil is pathetic, but it was 3 1/4 stars easily. I was wrong about Wrestlemania Live tickets in Atlantic City. As of February 8th, there were only 5,000 tickets sold and about 4,000 remaining. They are actually giving away 8,800 tickets, not 2,000 as I had originally been told, and the place will seat 17,800 when full. I figure tickets will be gone within a week or so. Hey, Titan is as hot as any promotion has ever been in this country, but there have been quicker sellouts. Last year they sold something like 20,000 tickets the first week as compared to 5,000 this year, so they probably wouldn't be able to fill one of those huge stadiums this time around. Atlantic City will still sell out more than a month in advance, of course. Titan is now claiming that WrestleMania 3 grossed $20.4 million and not $17.1 million as I wrote in the yearbook. This year the very worst case scenario I can come up with would say they'll gross $23.5 million, most likely $25 million. WrestleMania 4 would be closed-circuited to 161 locations in North America. February 6th in Boston drew $15,534 and $190,000, which is a sellout with lots turned away as Lanny Poffo pinned Terry Gibbs 1/2 star, Jacques and Raymond Rougeau beat Steve Lombardi and Barry Horowitz 1 1/2 star, Danny Davis pinned Brady Boone 1 1/2 star, Sam Houston, who worked better than anyone else on the card, pinned Mike Sharp 2 1/2 stars, Hogan and Bigelow beat DiBiase and Andre with super heat when Hogan pinned Ted after a leg drop. Andre worked 20 seconds total, 3 1/4 stars. Ricky Steamboat double countout with Dino Bravo 1 star. Sherry Martel beat Rocking Robin 1 star. Crowd asleep in this one. And the Islanders beat the British Bulldogs via DQ 3 3/4 stars. Ratings by John McAdam. Next show is March 5th with Honky Tonk and Hart Foundation vs Savage and Strike Force in a cage on top. David Sammartino wrestles Bravo in a prelim. February 6th in Philadelphia drew $13,112 and $163,608 as Poffo pinned Gibbs in a slow-mo match, -1 star, one-man gang pinned George Steele 1 star, Steamboat double countout Bravo in a bad match, only out of the ring for 6 seconds, 1 star. Davis pinned Houston using the trunks in a match where Houston looked good but Davis was worse than usual, 1 star. Hogan and Bigelow beat DiBiase and Andre when Hogan pinned DiBiase in 9:30. Andre got his stamina up where he worked 30 seconds this time, 2 3/4 stars. Rougeau's beat Lombardi and Horowitz, dud. Sherry Martel beat Robin 1/2 star. Sharp pinned Boone with a loaded arm pad 1/2 star, and Islanders beat Bulldogs via DQ in the best match on the card, 2 3/4 stars. Next show is March 12th with Hogan vs DiBiase on top. It was announced that DiBiase was defending against Hogan, but I'm sure the title will be held up before then. Finishing up, the Global Wrestling is already showing old tapes on its TV show. Roddy Piper is doing great in Hollywood. Reports I get indicate that Piper will never have to wrestle again, unless he wants to, because they've got him pegged as a hot commodity and he's in demand out there. Bobby Heenan was in the audience at a recent David Letterman show. Steve DeCero, Sammy Darrow is running Windy City Wrestling in Chicago with Steve Regal as champ. Fantastics to work a date there. Terry Gordy actually had knee surgery about 2 weeks back on both knees but is almost back. Ken Mantell is hoping to put together a Ric Flair vs. Kerry Von Erich match for May. Doing so would of course spell the end of the world-class belt as a supposed world title. Wrestlemania 4 main event will be Andre vs. Hogan. Cajun title held up, both probable, but we'll know for sure next time out. Also Islanders vs. Bulldogs and Valentine vs. Beefcake. Probably hair vs. hair, etched in stone while judging from the Friday night show. My guess is we'll have Honky Tonk defending the title against Savage, and Savage puts up Elizabeth, similar to the Summer Flair vs. Jim Garvin angle, although I don't think we'll be seeing Honky with any mannequins. The Friday night NBC show drew a 16.1 rating and a 26 share, which translated makes it the most widely watched wrestling match in the history of the United States. However, the Antonio Inoki vs. Leon Spinks and Maida vs. Don Nakia Nielsen card in Japan in late 1986 actually had a bigger audience, 39 million to about 35 million, and drew a 28.9 rating. I'll go into detail about the rating next time, but basically it was an average rated primetime show, although it did a lot better than NBC normally does with the bomb rags to riches in that slot. There were NBC folks who were talking top 5 or top 10 for the week, but it was probably in the number 25 range. Again, complete info unavailable at press time, but we'll have it next time. They aren't going to get a weekly series, although I'm sure they'll get another primetime special. I expected much better numbers as well, but I guess there aren't as many potential wrestling fans in the US as I thought there were. Inoki's last primetime show will be March 28th and will be moved to 4 p.m. Saturday. However, 14 weeks of the remaining 40 weeks in 1988 the show will be preempted, mainly for coverage of golf tournaments, so it's going to hurt. Just in rights fees from the network, not taking into account sponsor money and smaller live gates because of less exposure, it will cost New Japan $1.6 million in 1988 from the time slot demotion. New Japan has a big show March 11th in Nagoya, with Hazu defending the junior title against Koshinaka or Takada, Choshu vs. Samurai Warrior, one of the Hiro Matsuda trainees who they are giving a big push to for reasons I can't even begin to comprehend, and Fujinami and Kimura defend the tag title against Inoki and Murdoch. There was lots of talk that Piper would wrestle on Dom DiNucci's tour of Italy, but that didn't materialize. Inoki's appearances in Rome were so successful. Gate on January 23rd in Rome was $192,000, and in the same building the next night they drew $220,000. That New Japan will tour there this spring. They may butt heads with Titan, which is setting up plans for a 3-week tour of Europe in the near future. Titan won't make Wrestlemania 4 available to satellite dish owners because they claim that some bars and hotels picked up Survivors and were charging money to view it. Central State's title held up after a February 3rd match between Dave Peterson and Cuban Assassin. Crowds here are even lower than before. The Japanese women have put masks on there. They are now Dynamite Kind, Kaoru Cage, Dynamite Bear, Kumiko Owamoto, and Dynamite Queen Megumi Drill Nakami. January 28th in Flint, Me Before 2500 saw Bolsheviks beat Barbie Dolls, Powers and Roma. Sherry Martel pinned Velvet McIntyre. Rude double count with Steamboat. Lanny Poffo pinned Sika in an upset. Honky Tonk beat Savage via DQ. Davis pinned Houston. Bravo pinned Coco Ware, and Strike Force beat Hart Foundation. January 30th in Edmonton drew another full house of 1,150 as Johnny Smith drew Biff Wellington 2.5 stars. Kerry Brown pinned Mr. Hito 3/4 star. Rip Rogers, who is getting tremendous heat, beat Jonathan Holiday in 1632.5 stars. Leo Burke put Hashif Khan to sleep dud. DeSalvo beat Bad News via DQ in 5 minutes dud. And finale saw Bruce Hart and Pillman and Jason go to a double DQ with Great Gama and Makan Singh and Jerry Morrow in 30 minutes 4 1/4 stars. Adios. Flash, WWF title vacated. Tournament at Wrestlemania. Andre vs. Hogan first round match. More next week.